Well, we are here in Exodus chapter 22, and we're in the middle of this section that is God giving a lot of, and what is really going on here is God is giving specific application, case law for the Ten Commandments. He gave the Ten Commandments. He's talking about going up on the mountain. If we go back to, go back to chapter 21. And actually the end of 20, he starts with talking after the people were afraid and the mountain shaking and all of that going on. He's talking about altars, laws about altars. So he's talking about how we are to worship him, how the children of Israel were to worship him. And if you look at it, if you go through and look at the text, we've got the Ten Commandments, then this section on how we are to worship God. And then if you jump ahead to chapter 24, which we'll get to eventually, you jump ahead to chapter 24, it's God taking Moses and the elders and Nadab and Abihu and Aaron, the priests, up onto the mountain in those graded levels of access, just like the temple was laid out. So we've got this stuff about access to God. How, and if you think of an altar, what is an altar? It's an intersection point between God and men. It is through sacrifice that we approach him. Okay, and then they're going to go up on the mountain. But in between, in chapters 21, 22, and a good bit of 23, except right at the very end of 23, we've got this case law. And we can see that as this is how you take the Ten Commandments, and here's practical application for that. And some things that more than application, it's expansion of how you live this out. So interestingly, with that in mind, I know it's been a while since we've done Wednesday night. We'll be doing it this week. Wednesday night, we're doing the Gospel of Matthew. And in Matthew, we've got the Sermon on the Mount. And what is the Sermon on the Mount about? The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus teaching his disciples how we live in the righteousness that he gives us. The righteousness of Christ that is bestowed upon us as though it's a robe of righteousness, Paul describes it as, that wraps around us and covers us, but we also live in that. So you look here, and what do we have? We've got how the children of Israel were made righteous, and I'm making the little air quotes there, because all of those sacrifices pointed ahead to Christ, the ultimate sacrifice. When John the Baptist saw him at the starting point of his public ministry, John the Baptist, standing on the banks of the river Jordan, saw Jesus and pointed at him and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." He's the one who fulfills all of these prophecies. He's the one that all of the sacrifices pointed ahead to. Because understand this, the Jews never believed that the blood of those animals saved them. They knew it was God's mercy, and God's mercy is best pictured and looking back from our vantage point in time. That blood all represented the blood that Christ would shed for them. Okay, so we've got this connection, this real connection in our lives of how we're made righteous, and in that righteousness, how do we then live? And we want to understand this in the context of us being God's imagers. It is our job job is a lousy word. When we think of job, we don't think of positive things. It doesn't have positive connotation other than remuneration. We get paid for it, and hopefully we enjoy our work somewhat. But a job is a job. This is more than a job. It is our calling. It is our mission. It is our purpose, that we represent God, that in what we do, how we interact with and live with our families, husband, wife, children, parents, the community, in all of that, we are to represent him. He is using us in this concept of imaging, that we are his imagers. And in Scripture, just a quick review on that, Scripture says that we were created in the image of God. And in the English, that comes to be, well, we're in the image of him. We think of an image, I've got images on my wall. I've got pictures. Those are images. It's an action thing. It is a role. It is what we do. We represent him in true righteousness and knowledge and true holiness. We are continuing his work. And all of this, guess what, is going to tie in with Eden. What were Adam and Eve to do? What was their blessed privilege in Eden? It was to work with God, to do his work, to serve in that way, in partnership with God. What do we get to do in heaven? What do we get to do there? We get to do his work, to spread the eternal Eden, to build it out the way he wants, whatever that might be. I don't know. I can only imagine. But that is what we are to do. That is what we will be blessed to be able to do. So while we're here, we are also representing him. We are imaging him to others. We are, in a way, in a very diminished capacity, we are creating Eden here, where there's justice and kindness and compassion and long suffering. And aren't all those things that I just listed off, aren't they what you want in a family? Aren't they what you want in a community? They're they describe the reality we would like to exist in. And in this harsh and cruel and unkind world, that's often not the case, but that's what we want. Okay. And that is what we are to endeavor to create through our lives to the degree that we are able. So this section here, getting back to the text, we can look at this and think, blah, 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 blah. Don't do this. Your ox runs away. Don't do this. Do this. If your ox kills somebody, do that. Don't do this. Somebody breaks into your house. If it's dark, you can kill them. If it's not, you can't. Blah, 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 blah. And we can think of it as dry, boring code, right? Open up a law book. I mean, like shall. Yeah, shall, all that stuff. You shall do this, you shall not do that. But if you ever actually look at the statutes, and I've done it particularly for like gun laws, for concealed carry and all that stuff. When you read it, it's like so horrible and dry and boring. It's stuff only lawyers can write and only lawyers can understand. That's not what this is. It definitely has that ultimate legal component to it, because the one who is laying it down, who is proclaiming it, is justice himself. He's righteousness, he's holiness. But in this, what we have is a window into the heart of God. Because these codes, as you go through them, these laws, in many ways, they're not unique. Okay, there was the code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi was a great king who lived back then somewhere in the 1700s BC, and we have the Hammurabi Code, and he wrote down, he was a king, and there are all of these decrees and laws, and in many points there are similarities, and with Hittite laws and other cultures, but there are things that set God's law apart. We covered one in the Ten Commandments. We said it's unique to all moral codes. And what was it? You shall not covet. You shall not sinfully want something else. Other law codes didn't even deal with that. They would recognize it as being a cause for the actual crime of stealing or larceny or whatever else, that they would see it that way. But in and of itself, it wasn't prohibited. So that's a way that God's law is different. We're going to see a lot more stuff here. Now, there are 2 chapters of this stuff that we're going to try to cover today, and it's we're not going to go into all the details with it. There's a lot of interesting stuff if we did go through all of the details. But what I want to highlight is the ways in which, we talk about some things that are just culturally difficult for us to understand. When it comes to stuff about adultery, violating a virgin, some of these other things, boiling a goat, a young kid in its mother's milk, these things, we don't have a cultural connection with that it makes sense to us, because these people were different than us. Key point, they lived 3,000 years ago. 3,500 years ago, okay? The world in which they lived was different. The way they saw things was different. And we talked about last week in the context of slavery, that was just the way it was. God took it and made it kinder, and we'll see some more of that today. I believe we get into it. I've been jumping all over the place in my study. In all the other codes that we have from antiquity, you could hit your slave. If you killed him, you weren't in trouble for it. You could beat him. You could knock out his teeth. You could knock his eye, make him blind, whatever else, and there weren't penalties for that. God took that thing that was just the way the world was, and his law for his people made it kinder, gentler. It also set a limit to how long that person could be enslaved. Vastly different than all the other ancient law codes that we have uncovered. So let's jump in. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox, 4 sheep for a sheep. Now this is just, what would you call it? Preventing bad behavior. It is a deterrent. It is a deterrent. In other codes, like in Hammurabi's legal system, if he couldn't make restitution for it, he was put to death. Okay? Not here. There was restitution to be made. If a thief is found breaking in and struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. In other words, he's just, you can see what he's doing. He's just there to steal stuff. He's not in the middle of the night. Somebody comes through your window. You don't know why they're there. You don't know what's going on. Back in that day, you're going to grab your sword and whack the guy, right? Now you grab your 9mm. You can't see what's going on. It can't be good. He's coming in the middle of the night. Daytime, the guy's breaking in to steal something. You can tell that. These same laws apply today. I mean, now we've got the castle doctrine in a lot of states, and that's to deal with how some of these things were abused. But what's laid out here was throughout history of the Western world, common law. These things form the basis for much of our legal code. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. So Hammurabi's code, you're put to death if you couldn't make restitution. Here, he gets sold for his theft. And because he's sold into slavery, the rules about 6 years was the longest you could be a slave. 6 years was the longest you could be a slave. So you had to pay for it through being indentured in servitude, slavery, to the individual from whom you stole when you couldn't repay it. But there was an end to it. There was some kindness, some compassion. If the stolen beast is found alive and in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. Now, just the way this reads in the Hebrew, it's kind of clunky to know, is this saying the person who had it, or he sold it to someone else? So let's say I steal your ox, I sell it to Ed down the road, and then I go on a bender and spend all the money. Well, Ed gets caught with the ox. He has to make restitution. You buy stolen goods, you're in trouble, right? And that's why the whole law codes about deeds, titles, etc., a piece of paper that shows, hey, this belongs to this person. You can't sell a car without a title. You can't sell a home without a deed, okay? But it's based on what God lays out here in Exodus 22. And again, much of this is repeated again in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, just depending. And if you have any questions or comments, please jump in. I'm trying to move along just because there's so much to cover, but I am happy to field questions, to hear comments. You got something to add, go ahead and jump in. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field and in his own vineyard. So I let my cow out, it eats all your hay. I got to pay you back with the best of my hay, or if it's a vineyard, the best from my vineyard or orchard or whatever it might be. Again, there is that restitution. It's just fair. It's just fair. Hey, you're sitting in third grade and you're talking to the person next to you, and Steve next to you on the other side eats all your tater tots. Well, the teacher's going to give you his tater tots because you ate he ate your tater tots, right? Same principle. It's fair. It's fair. Just a comment. And this is, I got this, and then unfortunately, everybody knows how it ended up with him. But Bill Cosby said a lot of very clever things about kids and family and things. And one of them was the ultimate arbiter of fair is an 8-year-old. If you want to know if something is fair or not, ask an 8-year-old. They'll tell you. They understand fair, right? He took my stuff. I get some of his stuff, whatever. Just interesting. Okay, if fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make full restitution. When you hear stacked grain, whatever these other things that they're talking about, think about your money in a bank, okay? These people didn't have money in a bank. They had crops, and they had their harvest, and they would sell it off over time to make money. So, and again, you start the fire and you don't maintain it and control it, the damage that's done by that fire, you're in trouble for, okay? It promotes responsibility. And in all of this, there is the interest of the family, of the community. Those things are paramount in this theocratic legal system. And by theocratic, I mean God's in charge. And it was a theocracy. There wasn't a king. Moses simply spoke for him, okay? God was in charge, and it stayed that way all the way up until the time of Samuel, when the people insisted on having a king. This was a theocracy. If a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe, and it is stolen from the man's house, then if the thief is found, he shall pay double. The thief has to pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for an ox or a donkey or for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing of which one says, this is it, the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. Okay, now we just took a turn into something pretty interesting and confusing. But let's finish first of all with verse 8. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. Travis next door loans me or entrusts with me some property while he goes away. I'm in charge of that. By taking his property, I assume responsibility for it. If I don't want the responsibility, I don't have to take the property. But if I take the property, be it animals, car, whatever, I am assuming the responsibility for it. That is understood. Okay. If it gets stolen while I have it, well, then we got a problem. We don't find the thief. He entrusted it to me. Who's on the hook for it? Well, first of all, it has to be determined, did I just say it was stolen and it really wasn't? I went and sold it or whatever. Trying to ascertain the truth in that situation can be rather murky, but it talks about going to God, and it says the one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. Now, you can read and read and read and read about this. Scholars have all kinds of things to say on it, and none of them agree how this worked out, how it was that God condemned one of them. Apparently, they knew how it would happen. It wasn't shared with us. There are a lot of possibilities. Did they cast lots before the Lord? Whatever. We don't know. Later, it will talk about swearing before God, and we'll talk about that then. But this is just one of these things. I could throw out some ideas here that sound pretty convincing as to what this might be. There are other ideas I could put out there. They're not mine. I'd be stealing them from people who don't do anything but study the Old Testament.
Dad, I had a question.
Sure.
The Hebrew side study. The Ha Elohim and Elohim, gods and judges or judges of human. I'm so lost in it. Like you said, there's so many different things and different translations. I'm upside down. Yeah. Is it Ha Elohim or Elohim? HA with the, or is it just the flat Elohim? That's
hold on. Yeah, it's got Ha Elohim. It's got the article, but even when you get down into and what he's asking about, Elohim is the Hebrew word for God. It's kind of a tricky word because, well, it's plural. The im on the end in Hebrew is what makes something plural. And that word is used when you get into it and you do a word study there in Logos, and it's going to pull up all the different ways that Elohim is used. It is used for all kinds of things. It's used for judges, and that's what Derek is asking about specifically. It's used for judges like those who would represent God. And that's one of the possible explanations. But there, oftentimes when you're making the determination, if it's not just clear, God is saying something, God is doing something. Some of these other cases, you look at things like, is the verb that's used plural or not? Then but even with that, sometimes for God, it will use a plural verb. The verb, the number in the verb and the number in the noun have to agree. That works differently in different languages. But here, there's not enough textual evidence to absolutely nail it down. So what you're asking about is, could this be judges who are, speaking for God, in other places, in the Old Testament, it has the priests make determinations about things. It has elders make determination about things. That is one of the valid possibilities here. It definitely is. And it's the easiest to understand because, you've got judges operating here and they're going to do their best to ascertain the truth. That is a very good possibility. And probably the better option, if you're going to go beyond, we don't know what it is exactly. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I see it now. Yeah, I see the assertion. I didn't know verb. I didn't know verb or noun when I was doing the study, and I Hebrew confuses me, as you know. That's why it's study. So I was just trying to put all the pieces together, and I was like, is this a verb or a noun? Like I couldn't figure it out. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then the word for condemns is also plural. It's a third person masculine plural. So
now is the oath plural? The Shavath Yahweh, which I think it translates to invoking a witness or seeing a witness. My translations are terrible as well.
Okay, no, that's all right. About the parties coming before God.
Yes.
Is that in verse 22:9? Verse 9. The case of both parties shall come before God.
I think it's 11.
11. Okay. Oh, an oath by the Lord. Okay, let's just move ahead then. If a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep safe, and if it dies or is injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath to the Lord shall be between them both to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. So with that, with an oath to the Lord. Okay, let's jump to verse 11. Now, what did you want to know about in particular?
The like torn in two pieces. I didn't understand like the oxen part of it. Like if it's the beast or the lion, the whole thing just confuses me. Like how, other than the oath to God, how is it made right? Like,
well, here's the thing, and this was the comment I was going to make on this with an oath by the Lord, and whether it's by the Lord. Let's see here. And it's, I would prefer the translation there, an oath to the Lord. The point here with the oath part is an oath to God, saying, I swear to God. We do that very lightly. They did not. It was a theocratic society. They understood God as the ultimate judge. And it was, the understanding was, if you swore to God, you were held accountable to that forever. There was no getting out of it. There was not saying, oh, yeah, I was only kidding, fingers were crossed, any of that stuff. So the weight of having someone, okay, you say that it was driven away and nobody saw it and it's not your fault, swear to God about that. And they would not do that lightly. That's the understanding.
Got it.
Of that.
Thank you. It was the context. I didn't understand it like that. I was like, this doesn't. Okay. Thank you. BC versus AD. Very confusing for me there. Thank you.
Yep. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. Again, you're responsible for it. If it is torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn. You got your critters out in the field, wolves, lions, bears were going to do their damage. That was going to happen. It was considered today, in insurance terminology, that's what's called an act of God. It just happens. Lions eat things. So you wouldn't be held accountable. And this was just what's fair. It's just what's fair. If a man borrows anything of his neighbor and it is injured or died, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. Again, I took responsibility for that thing when I borrowed it from Travis next door. Okay. But if the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If the owner's there, hey, just because it's on my property and your horse died, I don't have to pay you for the horse. If the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it was hired, it came for its hiring fee. In other words, I paid you to use your horse to pull my wagon and it fell down dead while it was pulling my wagon. That the risk is implicit in the rental fee. Okay. Today you rent a U-Haul, you pay a few bucks more for the insurance, right? You rent a car, you pay a few bucks more for the insurance, but in their system, you hire the animal out. If it dies while it's working, it's not the person who's using its fault. Okay. Okay. Now we get interesting. Not that stuff wasn't interesting, but culturally, there's much more of a disconnect here. Okay. Law is about, and then the heading is social justice, but the headings can just make us think down paths. And here's the problem with headings. Moses didn't put that there. An editor, sometime shortly after Moses, didn't put that there. The people who translated the ESV put it there. So I like to, other than finding my place, not let that influence my thinking, because that those words aren't from God, and it can start my mind down a trail that might not be productive in understanding the text. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. Okay. A good way to understand this, is, as a son would represent, well, first of all, let's start here. Everything here is about the centrality, the solidarity, and the preeminence of the family unit. It was all about family. We today will say, oh, it's all about family. No, it's not. All you kids who are mine, you got old and moved away. My boys, they got old. They're not here working the land with me. What did they do? They went off on their own, right? Our society is different. Everything, the family unit was cohesive. It stayed together. Now, interestingly, for my nieces, Mary, who's married to a Mexican guy, and Emily, whose boyfriend is from Indonesia, for them, that family unit is much tighter. The way they view things, the way they think about things, very different. But even for them, it's different than the way it was back then. Boys didn't grow up and leave home. They stayed and worked with dad. Girls, and that represented in that cohesive family unit, it's all about taking care of one another, and primarily it's about taking care of your elders. No Social Security, no welfare, no Medicaid, no Medicare. It was the family that stuck together and provided all of the things that we view as coming from society today. Protection, support, love, all of that, okay? The boys represented strength. I would have been considered a very wealthy man back in these days, have my farm, have 4 big, strong boys. Wow. I had it made in the shade, and 2 beautiful daughters. The daughters also had and understand these things in terms, and it sounds crass to us, but they didn't think of it as being crass. Economic value to the family. My daughters would have economic value to the family, because when I chose who they were going to marry and sent them off, I received remuneration, money, as I won't tell the story, money, gold, silver, etc. Okay, I received that because my family was losing economic value. The work that she did in helping mom can peaches and green beans and take care of the chickens and the eggs and provide food, cook food for the guys, the men. The 5 of us would be out working in the field, and we would have servants out there. The women oversaw the servants who took care of providing the food. I lose and move away. So I would want remuneration, compensation for that when they went away. And the other thing that did, hey, you know what? David, go look in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, where David did not consider himself worthy to marry King Saul's daughter, Michal. Why? He didn't have the money, and he was the king. Who am I? So Saul sent him out to get 100 foreskins of the Philistines because he thought he'd get dead trying. He thought he was going to kill him by doing that, and David brought 200 because he was a really bad dude. But if I send my daughter off to someone, I want to make sure he can take care of her. I want to make sure that family is solid and stable. If they can't pay me the bride price, I'm not giving my daughter to them. So it wasn't just cold and callous. It was, I wanted to make sure also she was going into a good situation, a good family. Now, so their ideas of adultery were different, okay? It was only adultery if you slept with a married woman. That's just the way the world was. It was only adultery if you slept with a married woman. The Hittites called it the ultimate crime, interestingly. But if someone seduces my daughter, she's no longer a virgin. Who's going to want to marry her? And if they do want to marry her, they're not giving me as much of a bride price to make up for what I'm losing in her usefulness in the family, right? So it seems cold and calculated and just about monetary, and it's like their property, whatever else. To the family, everybody was property. The boys were property too. They were just different kind of property. That's not the words they would have used, but conceptually, that's how we perceive it, okay? Now, all of that, me rambling on about that, is the effort we have to put into coming across these things that are culturally completely different than what we know. If I took my great-great-grandfather from the farm in Cadiz, Indiana, back in the late 1800s and brought him here to today, and he saw how I operate my family, first of all, he'd be wondering where the horses were. He raised Belgians. Where are the horses? How do you do any work? And the Pathfinder would have been completely confusing to him, but he would have thought us bizarre and weird in how we do things. Different culture. And that's just 140 years. That's nothing. So this is all about compensation in their system for the value of a daughter. And it wasn't just about the dad getting the money. The daughter understood herself to be damaged goods to the family because she'd been deflowered by this guy, okay? And if the dad didn't approve of the guy, this is about the girl. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him because he's a jerk, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. The guy still has to pay the money, but you don't get my daughter. Okay. A little bit of, I keep struggling with this word today. Deterrence. A little bit of deterrence. there. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Sorcerers, I'll just read this. This is from the Bible background commentary of the Old Testament. Practitioners of magic were outlawed on pain of death within the Israelite community. Each law concerning them is apodictic. That's a decree. Do this. It's not if then, which is more case law. If this happens, then this happens. Just total decree, apodictic. This total intolerance may be due to their association with Canaanite religion. Where were they going? You always got to think about where they are, where they're going, who they're going to be interacting with, or simply because their arts represented a challenge to God's supremacy over creation. Sorcerers, magic, witches, all that stuff is trying to get things done by going around God. Okay, this is Exodus 22:19 is just a yuck verse. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Okay, that tells us something about the cultural context into which they were going in the promised land. Okay, and the sequence here: sorcerers, religion, false religion, bestiality, and then sacrificing to other gods. You know, God doesn't, when we see these things, we don't just want to think, you know, it's like at the end of 1 Thessalonians. Let's go there. There's a completely different topic altogether, but I love this section at the end of Thessalonians. It's like Paul has these big things that he didn't get to and he's out of paper. Rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. Give thanks in all circumstances. Boom, boom, boom. These things aren't random and disconnected. It's not just crazy sequence, lack of sequence that Paul's throwing out there. They are all related. Okay. Same thing here. You go from sorcery to bestiality, and then whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. The sorcerers executed. Sleeping with animals, yuck, executed. Sacrificing to other gods, devoted to destruction. That is a very powerful term. It means not just that they're executed, but there's no coming back from that. There's no coming back from that. And I'll just read this as an excerpt from Carpenter. Great commentary on the book of Exodus. Heiser refers to it all the time. But of the spiritual perversion of the second example, it is asserted that they shall be set aside to utter destruction. A technical term reserved for those who are set aside irreversibly to receive God's judgment and wrath. It designates the people and plunder taken in Canaan by Israel or by persons such as the Amalekites, all of whom were to be destroyed by the priests and Israel according to God's instruction. So we're getting into the kites, right? The Hittites, the Amalekites, the Amorites, the all of the people who were the parts of the promised land. And remember, that's where we're going. We're on the journey there, who were to be destroyed, wiped out, rubbed out, all of them gone. Animals, chickens, ducks, don't keep their stuff. Don't keep any of it. Kill them all. This is that level, sacrificing to other gods, actually sacrificing. And where are we going? We're going to Canaan. Who is worshiped there? Baal. How was Baal worshiped? It's another yuck thing. Babies. Statue of Baal, heated up super hot, and living babies put in his arms. So yeah, devoted to destruction, you bet. There's no coming back from that. If you'll do that, your heart is gone. Your heart is gone, and God does not want you around. Okay. And these things that are so severe, we always think, wow, God was really harsh. No, he's showing us his heart. With that, who is he defending? He's defending his own sovereignty, his holiness, his right to be the one who is worshipped as the one who led them out of captivity in Egypt, but he's also defending babies. He'll get really mad about that. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. In their code, it could easily be misconstrued to think that foreigners have no rights. They have no rights. Kill them, steal from them, whatever. No, God says no. It's something that the United States has in common with that. It's abused with foreigners coming in and doing things and all that. But even foreigners, sojourners, people who didn't have a home, people who didn't have a nation, had rights. They were to be treated with decency in Israel. And again, that's different than everywhere else. Everywhere else, you go through the Code of Hammurabi, you look at the Hittite Code, and the Code of Hammurabi is very long. You go through the Hittite Code, there are gradations of crimes. If I steal from Derek, I have to repay 10 times. If I steal from a priest, I have to repay 20 times. If I steal from a government official or a king, I have to repay 30 times. Not with God. Not with God. In God's eyes, there are no classes in his society. We're all the same. And here, they all had one thing in common. They had all been sojourners. How can you not be kind to sojourners? You were sojourners for 400 years. You know what it's like to be treated unfairly, to be oppressed because you didn't matter, because you weren't considered as real human beings. You understand that. So you shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. Recurring theme in the scriptures, Old Testament, New Testament. Go through the Gospel of Luke and look at Jesus' kindness to widows, women, and children. Why? Why is this so important to God? I'll read the rest of this little section. We'll talk about that. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppressor, but you shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows and your children fatherless. Wow, that's pretty harsh. Why? Why? The widow in their society, remember that thing I was talking about, the family. The widow, the Nain that Jesus met on the road. He had this big, huge celebrating crowd, thronging crowd following him. They came to an intersection, and here was this widow who'd lost her only son, and she was a widow. Her life was over. Her life was going to depend entirely on the kindness of strangers, of her neighbors who had their own issues to deal with. Because in that cohesive family unit, the government didn't take care of mom and dad. The kids did. The kids did. If dad's gone, the boys are gone, there are no kids at all. Wow, she's completely on her own. Who was going to take in an orphan? These people struggled to feed themselves and to take care of their own servants. Who was going to take in an orphan, a fatherless child? God has kindness on the helpless. And in that society, still today, they're helpless. What happens today? All of those missing kids, far more than most people know, 70 to 80,000 children a year go missing in the United States, and most of them are orphans. The foster system is a mess. It feeds the sex trade and all that stuff. And who cares? Nobody cares. Why? Because they're orphans. They don't have parents crying out for justice. The widow, she has no person in power concerned with her. The widow who kept going to the judge. begging for mercy. The only reason he gave in to her is because she wouldn't shut up. So he finally gave her justice because she wouldn't go away. But nobody was advocating for her. So God, and what's the best example that you can think of for yourself of God having mercy and compassion on the powerless? Go look in a mirror, because it's you. You're powerless. You're powerless in your problem with sin. You're powerless in your being lost in your sinful nature. You're helpless in this world. We think we're not. We deceive ourselves into thinking we're not. But every good and perfect gift comes from above, poured out on us by the Father of the heavenly lights, right? We're powerless, right? When I am kind to the widow and the orphan, the powerless, the disenfranchised, whatever it might be, when I do that, I'm imaging him, and I'm living what he himself teaches me. It's like forgiveness. How can I not forgive someone else when I've been forgiven for so much by him? So that's the perspective for all this. This is why these things are more valuable than just knowing what to do, what not to do. They are a glimpse right into the heart of God and how he is concerned and what things really tick him off. And my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows and your children fatherless. Jesus got mad, really mad, once. Other than with the Pharisees and the Sadducees at the end when he was calling them whitewashed tombs and letting them have it. Other than that, in all his ministry, we see him get mad once. And that's when his own disciples were going to push the little kids away and keep him from coming to him. It says he was indignant. He was indignant. And he said, suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. And isn't it? It's not surprising when you keep in mind that Satan hates all the things that God loves. Abortion, the child sex trafficking trade, all that horrible, awful stuff. And you can go on and on. Marriage, family, all the things that God loves. And this code instructs people to value. God wasn't telling them the family unit shouldn't be the way it was. That was a very good thing. All these things Satan attacks. He hates. He can't stand them. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like the money lender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. If they need the money and they're poor, lend them the money. And if you don't get it back, you don't get it back. Guess what? It probably doesn't matter. It probably doesn't matter. Where kindness is, you won't find greed, selfishness. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak in a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. And what else will he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear him, for I am compassionate. The weak and the powerless, the widow and the orphan, the disenfranchised, God makes it very clear. He hears their cry, and it is answered. If not now, then in eternity. You shall not revile God nor curse the ruler of your people. Look at David. Look at David. Even when Saul was persecuting him, even when Saul was trying to kill him, he wouldn't speak against God's anointed one. That's what David always referred to him as, God's anointed one. Saul was God's anointed, and David would not kill him, even though he had multiple opportunities. And when somebody came and told David that Saul had been killed and was thinking they'd get a reward from David because they were bringing him that good news, and the guy told him, and the guy made a mistake. He lied and said that he had executed him, which he hadn't. David had him put to death. Very serious stuff. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. This is about giving. It is about returning things to God, and how important that is in our life of faith. It shows that you understand where things come from. It shows that you trust in God. It shows that you acknowledge that it's all from Him. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. God, that firstborn status, what does He call Israel earlier in this book of Exodus? When Moses, through God, is talking, when God, through Moses, is talking to Pharaoh, He refers to Israel as my firstborn. My firstborn, you have incarcerated. You've made them slaves. Let my people go. Firstborn, very important. Very important. And it's set up back with the Passover that the firstborn was to be offered to the Lord. You gave a lamb in substitution for that. Same thing with the animals, the firstborn of all the animals being redeemed. It is honoring God and His saving work and His grace and His mercy. You shall do the same with your oxen, your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. And the code was set up that they could redeem it with something lesser. But the point was to acknowledge all depends on our possessing God's abundant grace and blessing, though all earthly wealth depart. Right? That's from the hymn. You shall be consecrated to me, therefore you shall not eat any flesh that is torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. Things that were torn, you don't know what happened to it. It wasn't killed properly. There were all the rules about blood, which we're not going to take time to talk about today. It was unclean. It was unclean. And therefore, God's people who were to be clean were not to eat that which was unclean. You shall throw it to the dogs. Dogs were unclean. Why? They'll eat anything. In their culture, in their system, dogs were unclean because they ate dead stuff. They ate all kinds of stuff. They ate garbage. They were unclean. Again, culturally, that's a big disconnect for us. Okay, we got to stop there. Only got through chapter 22. Oh well. Next time we'll go faster through the law stuff. I just wanted to make sure to give a good feel for what it's about. If you understand the framework, the perspective, the context, then it makes a lot more sense. It's not just about do this, don't do this, you shall not do this, etc. It's about the context. Okay, we will stop there. It is 11:30. Next time we will get through chapter 23 and into 24. I encourage you to go ahead and read ahead. There's a lot of good stuff there. Okay.
That concludes our broadcast for today. We publish our videos on YouTube, BitChute, and Brighteon. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give us a like or a thumbs up. We invite you to subscribe so you can continue to receive our content. Also, please consider sharing this video with others. We love to hear from you, so please leave a comment below. This is Matthias 76, and together we will continue to decode the deception.